Whenever you're ready, Margaret.
George Dickinson was my father, and he served in the First World War. He was born in 1894, and at the age of 20 he joined the 6th Cheshire Regiment in 1914. He marched many miles in France through mud, rats, lice and filth in the trenches. Experienced gas on some occasions and had many experiences of going over the top. He was wounded in 1916 by a shell which seriously wounded both his legs. His life was saved by a German soldier called Glandorf, who went and took him to the field hospitals for treatment. Had he not done that, I'm sure my father would have died. Because of this meeting, my father and Glandorf wrote to one another for many, many years after the war was finished. After he was transported back to England, he spent many months in a military hospital down south, wearing his hospital blues because of his injuries, but he never went back to the front. After demobilisation, in 1918, he went back home to number 22 Russell Street in Heverley, Stockport. During his recovery, he met my mother, whose fiancé had been killed in the war over a period of time. A relationship grew between them, and they married in 1924. They then rented a home in Council Street, Heverley, and in 1926 they had their first daughter, Mary, my sister. I was born in 1930, being the second daughter, Margaret. In 1933 he bought a house at 22 Worsley Crescent, Stockport, Offerton and Stockport. And he remained there, until he died in 1962. I believe he had an early death due to his war wounds. Unfortunately, my mother died in 1953 at aged only 55 years, and this was a great loss to the family. My father worked for the Refuge Insurance Company until he retired. When I was a young child, we would visit the seaside at Wakes Week with cousins, grandparents, etc. We all loved the beach and the sand and the sea, and my father particularly enjoyed swimming. I remember being unable to look at his wounded upper legs apart from the odd glance, because I was so frightened of the dreadful state his wounds had left. Until I was older, I was not aware of his limp, but he never complained of pain either in his legs or the shrapnel wounds in his upper arms. I was 9 when the Second World War was declared, and Dad soon joined the LDV, the Local Defence Volunteers, and then followed into the Home Guard. I think he served his king and country well, making me and all his family very proud of him. My father was a lucky one to have lived when thousands of other young boys were killed whilst going over the top. How does one define bravery?
That's lovely, Margaret. That's great. So what we're going to do now is we're going to try to take the papers away, and we're going to ask Peter to talk about the diary.
Right.
Because I think if you talk about those things that you've talked about,
Yeah.
that's great. And then if Peter is able to tell us how we know about what happened to him through the keeping of the diary,
Yeah.
what we can do is we can cut, between what you've talked about and what Peter's going to talk about. Because I think it would be nice if you talk about the more personal angles about the story, and Peter talks about the diaries and the intricacies of the kind of things that he's doing.
Yeah.
And maybe if there are any particular excerpts from their diary that we would like to.
Can I borrow a pen? 'Cause I'm just thinking that, because what I'll do is I'll pre-note the one here and then I'll produce the right page on the diary.
Okay, so I'm going to take those off you so that you're just looking at Peter then.
Right.
All
You
right.
did very well. I
You
can't
did
believe you
really
remembered
well.
it all.
You
Like,
did really, really well.
Well, I did look at the script. I couldn't remember it.
Thank you.
Once we get into it, once Peter's done a little talk and you can see how it goes, what I'll probably get you to do is we'll try that again. But what we'll do is we'll ask Peter to ask you questions about certain ideas. So maybe we can get some where you're not looking at the paper so much. Does that sound all right?
Yeah.
So Peter, the same for you. If you can, I know that you're going to have to look down to read an excerpt, but if you can not look at the paper too much.
Yes, I'll try not to. Can I do it though that we start off by showing the diary? When I start to mention the diary, I'll show it then. I don't want to hold it all the time, so my hands will get sweaty and actually damage it. So then and then out of shot, I can then refer to the excerpts like that. So you've seen the diary, and then show it again at the end.
Yes.
Like that. Otherwise, I don't want to be sort of doing this.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to find some interesting and particularly interesting and amusing.
There's the ones where he talks about the gas attack. Because what I want to show you later, actually, Peter, what you'll be interested in is have you got a book about the history of the Cheshires?
No.
There is a paragraph in the book that tells us about the exact route that George took.
Really?
So I've took a copy of it so you can take it away.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Oh,
That's fantastic.
Thank you very much.
Great, thanks. What I was going to talk about was things like that Auntie Margaret referred to about the harshness of life.
Yes.
The gas, the fear, etc. Right, okay. We're doing this on the hoof a bit more. Is that alright?
That's the way.
Right, okay. So, I'll get the diary out so I can pen back in. Thank you. Sorry. So got it in my interesting bag.
Do you want gloves, Peter?
I think I prefer it, because I'm just conscious I'm going to possibly sweat. I don't want to do
because
that.
if
you've got any gloves, that'd be perfect. Did you pick up on this?
Butcher's Regiment.
No. I think that this is to do with this pig nonsense. You know, they're supposed to have caught a pig and then chopped it up. Do you know about this? No. The story that my dad told me, but he told my dad apparently.
He caught a pig and chopped it up.
They found several of them. No, not him personally, but several of them found a pig in the woods.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, he hasn't mentioned anything before. It starts on the 7th of Jan. But all my dad told me, he said, "Oh yeah, this famous incident." He also thought it was very funny that they could have gotten in a lot of trouble apparently, but they found a pig wandering around, or maybe it was a boar, I don't know. And basically, they were on doing some training, and they'd gone off in groups.
Yeah.
Over a distance, and it was late at night. They were supposed to just find somewhere to camp, and apparently he said that he told him that they found this pig, and they decided that they were so hungry they were actually going to slaughter it and then have pork that night.
Yeah.
And then he got called away. The next day he was supposed to have been called away, and he was really worried that senior officers would find out.
Yeah.
That's all I know. That's what he told me verbally.
Yeah.
They've got no written evidence of it. But it's just that is that. Why would he say that?
Butcher's Regiment. Yeah.
He's connected.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Butcher's Regiment. Yeah. Yeah. Could well be.
So I'll just say that, just a few words, and say that's what I believe. Maybe he didn't want to say any more than that for obvious reasons. Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah.
So if you start off of during his time, he kept this.
So I just introduce myself as I'm his grandson, so I'm the next
Yes.
generation. Okay. Right. I'm ready then. Okay. Okay, well, I'm Peter Oxley. I'm the next generation on from my Auntie Margaret. So I am George Dickinson's first daughter's youngest son, Mary's son. And Margaret had this diary from her dad, which she's given to me a few years ago now, which is a remarkable piece of documentary evidence about the First World War, and includes all his adventures, if that's the right word, during 1916 when he was in the war, when he was already promoted to the rank of sergeant. So he was already obviously doing quite a good job, you know, as a soldier indeed. And the diary does contain many quite amazing stories and anecdotes, all handwritten by him. Some of it's in pen, some of it's written in pencil. Some of the spellings of names of places, which are in French of course, are not always right, which I can imagine we'd all do. But you have to remember that this diary was probably written in the dead of night, it was probably written in poor weather, there may have been no daylight, he may not have had a pen handy, and he may have been in very unpleasant conditions in terms of the weather, the cold. So a lot of it's written during the winter time. It must have been very difficult to actually keep a diary at all at that time under those terrible conditions that these men had to endure. Anyway, I thought it'd be interesting to have the diary in the exhibition for other people to see. It was a very small one. I'm amazed that he's kept in such good condition. It's almost 100 years old now. So I thought I'd read a few of the excerpts from the diary and give people a flavour of some of the things that the men that were fighting in the trenches actually had to go through during the war. One of the first entries in the diary is on the 7th of January 1916, where he simply puts on the first entry the word 6 Butchers' Regiment, which doesn't really mean anything to us, except that I've just mentioned to my auntie, there was a story that my father was told by George, sometime in the 50s or very early 60s, allegedly about some incident where the men were out on some kind of training and were near a forest somewhere in France and allegedly caught a pig and then decided to slaughter the pig because they were all really hungry and they were out without much rations. And I think there was some concern that he might get into a bit of trouble for this, but of course these men were all incredibly hungry. Some of them were marching for days and days on end, and the rations really were not sufficient for their needs. So you can understand if several of them felt that some food became opportunistically available, that they would take it. Anyway, we'll not dwell on that one because it doesn't actually tell us in the diary what really happened, so we'll just use our imaginations, I think. But then as we go on throughout his movements from day to day, we see that there's a constant pattern of their activity, which was mainly either training or marching, and a lot of the marching was from all around the front, and the two biggest areas for the British sector were around Amiens and Albert, which is where the Battle of the Somme was fought, and further in the north towards Ypres, although from this diary, from these entries, he wasn't actually at Ypres, thankfully, because conditions there were probably even worse. But he was in all the areas, sort of sectors in between, around Lens and Arras, and these sort of well-known French towns. Anyway, in the diary entries, he talks about the 28th of January. He says that they left a place called Ailly-le-Haut-Cloqueur, and they marched to Piquigny. Now, this is a distance of at least 19 kilometres, which he actually says in the entries. And that is some walk at night, and he says the same night, so it clearly was quite arduous for everybody to actually have to do that.
Yeah.
And he mentions the weather's not very good in these weeks as well, so clearly it was awfully tough for them to do that. And then he goes on to talk about various places that they rested at. The next day, on the 29th of January, they were called out to a fire in a cotton mill, and they actually rested there. And there was a lot of stories that are mentioned here about resting in barns, which they thought, I think to them was like a 4-star hotel, to be honest. A nice hay barn, which is dry and warm, you know. And in some cases, he mentions later that he also stayed in a cottage, and that I think was really just like the Hilton for him, you know, that, in a real bed, comfy, clean sheets, and it must have been wonderful for them, you know. Anyway, he then moves along and he starts to talk about further movement down toward the Amiens region, because he starts off in Rouen at the start of the year and moves sort of to the east. And they go to a place called Vers-sous-Corbie, which is just to the east of Amiens. And they're there in the trenches for some days, and he complains about shells bursting only 15 yards away from them, which must have been very frightening. And he mentions specifically about having a bath and a change of clothing not before time. So, as you mentioned, they've got lice in their very unpleasant army uniforms. If you've ever seen the material, it's not very nice at all to wear on the skin. And it used to when it got wet, it would stay damp as well for a long, long time before it would dry out. So to be able to enjoy a change of clothes and a bath must have been fantastic. Then he says on the 26th of February that they, the night before, they put aboard motor buses, which weren't that common, and for them would have been great because it probably indicates it was a bigger distance to be travelled, as indeed turned out to be the case. And they go to from Longo, which is just again just south of Amiens, and they move up to the north sector that I mentioned earlier, a place called Hazebrouck, which is just to the west side of Ypres. And he says that they left at 8 p.m. on the motor buses, and they arrived at 9 o'clock the following morning. So they're quite slow, these vehicles, clearly not like a modern vehicle. And that must again have been a real bone-shaking ride for sort of 40 and 50 miles, And then he moves on talking about the training and the physical demands that he puts on them, and he says more training, route marching, physical training, etc. It's as though they're training all the time, and then eventually each section seemed to get put in a trench for 1 or 2 weeks, and then they get pulled out and sent on to do the relief and have some rest and training. This time he goes off to Boulogne-Capelle, which is quite close by, and a place called Bouziguem, which is quite well known. There's quite a famous cemetery at Bouziguem for the British Army. And he said he stayed there for 17 days, training as usual. He puts that in the diary over several pages, so you know that he's probably getting fed up. And then eventually they leave there, and he says that they left Bouziguem for a place called Villers-Bequin, which is 21 kilometres, everybody done up, so they're pretty exhausted obviously. And he says lots have dropped out of the march, so obviously it was very, very physically demanding, and despite all the training, perhaps it was a bit too much for some of them. Should just put that page for now, I'm going to show my gloves. There we go, thank you. Right, and he said that they stayed there then until sort of late March. And then at this sector, this northern sector, it is known, as I say, Ypres was known to be quite vicious, and all the towns got absolutely obliterated by shell fire from the heavy artillery behind the lines. And it's where the war started to turn nasty. This is before the Battle of the Somme, so 3 months before that started. And this is where the Germans started using the gas. And he says on the 29th of March that there's a stand to, which means they all have to come to attention and to be prepared for battle, because there's a gas attack. And he says that then the next day they do leave there, and again they have to march 6 kilometres to a place called Merville, and again they get a bath and a change, so it was like about 2 weeks difference between having a bath. He goes on then to say that they then march on south slightly, and they go to further down to a village that is now ruined, called Neuve-Chapelle. Now this is a site of a number of battles, especially famous for the Australians had a huge battle there, but we had British soldiers from the British Army, the Australians were there, the Portuguese had a division there, and they were almost wiped out. There's quite a famous cemetery there, which has got the crucifix. You may have seen this in many bits of poetry and literature and films, where there's a crucifix in the trenches. It was actually there at Neuve-Chapelle, so this must have been quite frightening, because George mentions how it's ruined, so clearly it was absolutely pretty much obliterated. And even the Indians had a division and they were wiped out, and there's another cemetery for the Indians on the crossroads, so it's quite an interesting place. And I will just mention here that when he's stationed there, luckily it's only for a couple of days, literally, which when I read it historically, understanding what had gone on, in the context of the battles, that's a good thing, because it was a very hot place to be indeed, And he's actually stationed there, say for a couple of days, and it's actually only a couple of miles, less than 2 miles from. It turns out that Adolf Hitler was actually stationed as well, which we found out subsequently, over on the ridge in a local bunker. In fact, I say 2 miles, it's about 1.5 miles across the field, to be quite honest. And we've checked historically, I've been doing some more research since we've spoken, and Hitler was there that period. He was actually there the whole time between January and September in 1916. So that's quite a scary thought, to say that maybe if George had been there a couple of weeks longer, he might have changed the course of history. Sadly, it wasn't to be. Anyway, he goes on in his diary and he talks about the weather has improved greatly now, so we're into early April. And he says, in his usual sense of humour, he says, the weather is beautiful, it's like Blackpool, plenty of sand, bags. And then he starts talking about some of the things he observes from time to time, and he says that he sees a grand air duel for 2 to 3 hours. Eventually the enemy planes are forced down and behind his own lines. The day after, his captain is actually killed by a sniper who was also shot in turn, and the Black Watch relieved them. And then a few weeks later, they start moving around again. So thankfully, they don't stay in this rather dangerous area that he was in there. And there's more training again. So they're marching and training, and this is the pattern. It starts all over again. And then they move to a place called Hingette, which is about 10 miles away. And again, they sort of face some quite serious gas attacks. And he says on the 1st of May, which is a Monday, he says, stand 2, heavy gas attack at 7:40 p.m. We got the stand down at 20 past 11, so they were in fear of being hit by gas for 3 hours plus, you know. He then says the next night that he sits on a haystack until 12:30 in the morning, watching the bombardment from a distance, which is a terrific sight from this distance, he says. So obviously the sky would be alight, you know, and there'd be quite on the 5th of November, I imagine. Mm. Some of the things that are interesting in the diary as well is that some of the terminology that's used, they generally seem to call the Germans Fritz, which was the parlance at the time. And he also, they talk about different weapons that are being used, and he talks about one, he says, which he puts in inverted capitals, inverted commas I should say, a projectile we've not seen before called rum jar, which we think was probably some sort of short mortar. There were quite a lot of those in that sector. He said, we soon quietened him down with a speedy return of fire. So obviously they've shot back a little bit, you know.
He talked about whiz-bangs, didn't he?
He did indeed, yes, here we go. On the 12th of May, a few days later, he says, now they've been under fire like this for some days now, and he says, this is really getting very worrying. A fairly hot time between 6:30 and 8:30 p.m. We all got some sorts of shrapnel, nerve gas, whiz-bangs, grenades, bombs, and aerial torpedoes. And as he puts it in the diary, it was some hot underlined. Yeah. So obviously a very frightening night. You know. And then the next day they're relieved by the Black Watch, which means they're going to get transferred out of that trench, thankfully. And he says that they now get moved to the reserve village of Givenchy. We're getting strapped, sounds like it. I'll just rewind there, shall I think? Because obviously it's a big one, that. So we get to Sunday the 14th of May. They're relieved by the Black Watch, so that must have been a great relief for him to move on. And they move to the village of Givenchy, which is north of Arras, and overlooks the famous slag pits at Lewes, which is where there's a lot of mines in the area. They're very famous because they're very triangular shaped, very distinctive. And he says the sappers, that's the engineers, sprung a mine on our section, so I think he means the German sappers, obviously. There's more strafing when our artillery give them some trouble. The Germans shelled our village, a big shell smashing into a big tree about 15 yards from us and bringing it down. The day after, the 18th of May, he says, aeroplane duels every day now. Night time, we were sat in a field out the back of our billet, about 30 of us playing house. What's that house?
Was it bingo?
Yes, of course.
I think it is. House in house.
No, a house in the minute.
Might have to rewind that again.
I think that is a big one. Goodness me. That's awfully low. Right, where were we? Let's go back.
I'd say to Margaret, it's very nice when you chip in, so don't be afraid.
All right.
It makes it seem very natural, so
yes.
If you're happy with that.
Yeah, oh yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Right, I'll just go back to the previous one then. So, on the Tuesday the 16th of May, George says that the German sappers have sprung a mine on our section. And he says there's been more strafing when our artillery give them a troubled time. The Germans shell our village, and a big shell smashing into a large tree about 15 yards from us bringing it down. The day after, the 18th of May, a Thursday, he says, aeroplanes dueling every day. Night time, we were sat in a field out the back of our billet, about 30 of us playing house.
You've already
Which we think is bingo, yes I know.
We're
We think
rewinding, Margaret.
Oh, you've got to remind me. Yeah.
We got the plane going over. He's doing it again.
I'm doing it again.
I've done it 3 times
Now, I've got to do it again now. I'm repeating myself, I'm getting old. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to go back and do it again. Yeah?
Is that right?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So, to the sappers, okay. So, he then goes on Tuesday the 16th of May, and he says that the German sappers have sprung a mine on our section. There's more strafing when our artillery give them a troubled time. The Germans shell our village, which is Givenchy, and a big shell smashes into a big tree about 15 yards from us bringing it down. There are aeroplane duels every day. On the 18th of May, he says, at night time we were sat in a field out the back of our billet and 30 of us were playing house. Which is bingo, I think.
I think so.
When Fritz put 3 shrapnel shells right over us. Strange to say no one was injured, but to see the Russians scramble and bits of shell whizzing all around, obviously very frightening. He says an unusual occurrence on this part of the line was to see an aeroplane. This is now on 22nd of May, and he describes a very unusual duel and attack by the British side, and he says Mayon, the Mad Mayor, he was called. This is obviously a British fighter ace. And he says, this man was very daring, the most daring I have ever seen. He used to go up very high until he was right over the German lines and then would come down with a swoop to within about 100 yards of the German trenches and train his machine gun on the trench and sweep along, terrifying the troops. Machine gun fire on rifle fire used to go up at him, but he didn't trouble. He is said to have accounted for a great many of the enemy. Very brave, sounds very daring. That's almost dangerous, isn't it? Yeah, very risky indeed. But it must have been amazing to see.
It must.
And then George has one of these sort of things that we all suffer from time to time in life. He suddenly has a bout of minor illness where he actually has to have his tonsils. He has a tonsil problem. And he gets sent back to the base in Rouen, which is right out of the battlefield. And he goes off to hospital on the 12th of May. And he says, 12th of May, admitted to hospital, and then sent down to the base on the 27th. But they actually do the operation to remove his tonsils on Sunday the 3rd of June.
Yeah.
And then he's allowed, 9 days off, and then he's straight back to Givenchy, back to the front line.
Yeah.
So he's had a little bit of a break. It's probably quite helpful.
Yes.
And he goes on to say, joined the battalion again at Givenchy, 21 again, killed. Sorry, start again. I'll have to wind back on that one. On Monday the 12th of June, he goes back to the front line and he says, joined the battalion at Givenchy, just behind the line. The day after the 13th, he says, unlucky 13th, 11 casualties, 5 killed and 6 wounded. And the following day, he said, went in the front line itself, our artillery bombardment, enemy trenches, heavily. 6 more casualties today. The following day, Thursday the 15th, another violent bombardment by our artillery, but the enemy reply furiously. And that's now Friday the 16th of June, and this is where the diary stops. Now, at this point, we believe that he was sent over the top to go into no man's land, and then was hit almost certainly by German artillery. And this is where the wounds that he talked about were obviously inflicted.
Yes.
And he was hit in both legs, one major wound through one leg, which obviously went into the other,
Yeah.
and in the arm,
And in both his arms.
both his arms.
Well, no, shrapnel
Yeah.
wounds in both his arms.
So obviously a shell has just detonated and he's got several pieces
Yeah.
in him. And this is where the story becomes very extraordinary, because then we believe that, from the story he told when he came back, this extraordinary tale of him being rescued in no man's land by this German who was apparently called Glandorf, and who basically gave him a piggyback ride, must have decided the war was too much for him as well, and decided to save George, and then took him to a British field hospital, Red Cross hospital, because there were some stationed only about a mile away. And then he apparently gave himself up, surrendered. and he was taken off a cup of tea and off to the prison camp. So that really is where the story stops as far as the actual diary. That's the end of George's war, and I think he was disappointed he was so badly injured, but also lucky that it wasn't worse.
It was the end, yes. It was
So
the
he
end
was
for
out of
him.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Yes, so we have a lot to think about, and we think also about all the other thousands of soldiers that were killed on this dreadful war, during this dreadful war. And they were very brave young people, because that's what they were, just youngsters. Some of them, I believe, I heard, under aged 18, 16-year-olds. And another tragedy of the First World War, I think, was the way young boys who got, what was the word when they went mad, you know?
Oh,
Shell shock. They weren't treated for the shell shock, they were treated as deserters. And they were shot, some of them were, because they deserted, because they'd run away in absolute fear. And let's not forget, they were children.
Yeah, there were 250,000, I read this morning, there were 250,000 under 18s that were actually in the trenches, who shouldn't have been there. The Sauna page joined up was 18.
Yeah.
Some of them didn't want to leave their mates and they joined up, and some of them, because at that age you can look a lot older. And this article was saying that, of course, when they go for the army medical, if you're a strapping lad of 17, 17 and a half, they can't tell the difference. And if you lie about your age, they'll get through.
Yeah.
But there are others that went because they didn't want to be left, the PALS battalions in these villages where, and towns, especially in this part of the world, the northwest, where they didn't want to be left as the odd ones out because they were a year or two too young, and they wanted to go perhaps with their older brothers,
Yes.
things like that.
Yes.
So it's terrible, really, you know.
It was a very, very sad time. A sad war.
Do you want to take a break for a cup of tea and then we'll ask some more questions, because you've both been talking for quite a while. Do you want to know
Yes.
a drink of water or a cup of tea or anything?
Water. We'll
Just
bring
some
up
water, yeah. And then I'll ask some questions.
I've got just gin in mine, and what do you want? Something.
Yeah.
Getting it
It
out.
migrates, doesn't it, over years?
Yeah.
It often does migrate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you can talk about that as well, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to have another little go then? We'll put that,
Yeah.
that'll be your last drink, and then we'll keep
This is your last drink.
breaking.
Barry squad.
your last drink for a minute, and then you can have another. We'll keep asking.
No, I'm kidding. Yes.
Right, yeah. Okay, so.
Back to First World War.
Right, so. Okay, so in the middle of June 1916, George's war is over in rather horrific circumstances, but he survives. But he's very, very badly injured, clearly, and has to be evacuated back to England.
Yeah.
We don't know the exact location, but there are many of these places in the south of England in particular that were made into British military hospitals. So stately homes and big houses were often used.
Yeah.
As we saw on the TV programme, the Crimson Field.
Yes, indeed, yes.
And that showed a field hospital that was behind the lines. But anyway, we were not sure about the exact timescales because he doesn't keep the diary anymore, unfortunately, because he's probably unable to write, I imagine, in so much pain. But I'm guessing here, maybe about a year he's probably being treated in hospital. So that takes you towards middle of 1917, maybe the end. So only about a year from the end of the war he must have returned perhaps to civilian life.
To be demobilised.
Yeah. And then what did he actually do initially? His job, or was his job after the war?
He got in with the Refuge Insurance Company, which he worked for them for all those years until he retired for all that time. And he was an agent for them.
And his injuries didn't affect him in his job then?
Well, he used to rest up, I remember a lot, in the evenings. And he had a limp, which I didn't notice until I was an older child. But he never complained of trouble or pain or anything. But then Mary and I were just mere children, and he wouldn't be talking about the First World War in front of us anyway, because I don't think many of the First World War people did like to talk about their experiences. They seemed to want to keep it very private to themselves, or else they didn't like to remember it back. And
I suppose one of the problems as well with the First World War that's unique about it is that it wasn't shared by the wives and girlfriends
No.
and brothers and sisters, because it was just the men went to war and had the war somewhere else. There wasn't much apart from odd Zeppelin raids on
yes,
There was no real impact of the war here in Britain.
no,
So it was almost like another world, I suppose.
yes,
It's a
yes,
nightmare.
indeed. Well, obviously the Second World War was the one where everybody was involved.
So everybody felt more involved together,
Yeah.
and they would probably talk about it more. Because
But the First World War, it was just the young men and boys who battled on their own, and given, in my opinion, stupid instructions about going over the top and whether they wanted to or not, and then we wonder why a lot of them deserted, because as I previously said, they were children, just young lads. Very, very sad situation.
And in terms of George's recovery back into normal life then, so he got married in 1920?
1924 we got married, yes.
And then you were...
Mary was born in 26 and I was born in 30.
Okay. So when did you first become aware of his involvement in the war? How did you know about it? Was it because you saw his injuries?
Yes.
How did you feel about that?
Very frightened, didn't like to look. I didn't see him in a state of undress at home or anything, when he didn't in those days anyway. But it didn't impress me as much then, or else I didn't see him in a state without his trousers, as it were. But of course on a beach, when we used to go on holiday to the seaside, he loved to swim, and he would be wearing swimming trunks. And of course that was when both Mary and I would see this dreadful injury, which was something like whatever diameter that is in one side of his leg. A horrible thing. And then that had come out at the inside of his leg and gone into the other leg. And it was just a horrible puckered mess to see. But it didn't stop him swimming, and he used to bowl. He used to love to bowl with my grandfather. And he used to take his turn at playing cricket on the sands when we were children.
So he didn't let it stop him?
No, I don't think he did. I think he was very brave, because it was a horrible injury. It must have hurt. So I think he was very brave about it. With regard to his diary, did you want to know about his diary?
How it makes you feel
How
when you
the-
read it.
I'm sorry, I interrupted.
How it makes you feel when you read it and you talk about it with Peter.
When I first read it, which was, of course, many years ago, I was astounded by what was written in it, and very upset that this was a thing about my father, my daddy then, and it was horrible reading of what happened to him and what happened to all the many others, of course, and so many of them were not as lucky as my father, because they were killed in many instances, especially going over the top. And it also made me feel very proud as I got older, so proud of him and so proud that I'd got this diary. And I used to read through it quite a lot, because strangely enough, his handwriting never changed. what was written in that diary was the handwriting. It was still the same when he was an older man.
He's a very, very neat writer.
Yes, he was a very neat writer, but I think they were taught to be neat writers in those days, weren't they? And I felt very proud that he was in that horrible, horrible escapade, but proud that he was there and he did his bit and served his king and country.
Mm.
And that makes me feel very proud of it.
The impression I get from reading it is how would I feel in the same circumstances, and it's unimaginable really. It's no war film can do justice to what they were going through every single day, and it's not just like, you know, Saving Private Ryan, D-Day, where it goes up for a day or two and then things calm down. This was relentless, month after month after month.
Yeah.
And this is why some of these young people went insane. You know, there's photographs of them with serious mental illness. You know,
Yeah.
and you can imagine any ordinary person would potentially have that.
Yeah.
Because I just don't. It depends on what your breaking point is, and
Plus the fact that may interrupt you there that they, as I've said before, they were not even adults. They were
prepared.
kids.
Yeah, yeah, and they weren't prepared for it. I mean, you've got to remember this is not that long after the sort of outcome of the Industrial Revolution, and previous wars had been sort of gentlemen fighting on the battlefield with an odd cannon
Yeah.
and a sword and a horse,
Mm.
and they were thrown into this mechanised war where the air was just full of hot lead, and there's no escaping from it, especially like you said earlier. No logic to the way they were actually fighting the war. Later wars, you know, obviously lessons were learned, but they were still thinking they were in this kind of honourable war where they would have battle lines drawn. But with the weapons that they had on both sides, it was just absolute murder. You know, there was no escape from it, and that must have been absolutely terrifying. And to imagine yourself in that situation, the only question that comes to my mind is just how long you could cope with it for. I mean, he coped with it for 2.5 years almost.
Yes, he did.
And he got promoted, so he was obviously made of very tough stuff indeed, you know.
Yeah.
But it's understandable when you hear stories. He was quite fortunate. He moved around a lot, and he seemed to be only in the worst areas a short periods of time until that critical battle at the end when he was injured. And this was probably a very similar story for a lot of soldiers at the time, that they were, you know, those are the ones that probably were able to mentally cope with it because they were at least moving around. That was the one good thing that he had. But
I think it's a shame that he didn't start writing these diaries when he first joined.
Yes, if we had 2 years
in 1914, whereas this we've only got from January to June.
to June, yeah, 6
when he
months.
was wounded, wasn't he? Yeah.
Yeah, so but what we've done now, of course, is we produced a map just in the last week or two, whereby we've now been able to identify the actual locations on the map in detail from the locations on the diary, and suddenly you can actually track exactly where he's gone properly in both the area around Albion, which is this one, and then further north up towards Arras, which is near where, of course, he was injured. A place called Vineyridge later on, but it amazes me when I've done this work just to see the amount of travelling around that was done and how these young lads were expected to sort of march for 20 miles in some cases and then have a few hours sleep and a bit of bully beef and some tea and then march back again in some cases, and that it is frustrating, you know, because you think that you're wasting their energy, you know, and this was obviously what the First World War was like. It was moving chess pieces around the board, and this is what you were alluding to before. For me, I read it and think, I just couldn't have stood this for very long, you know. I think I'd have been one of these guys, whether I'd deserted or gone mad, or I just don't know how you could manage that for 4 years, and some of them did it for 4.5 years. It's terrifying to read, really. And to me, that's true stress. You know, people complain about stress in the modern world. Oh, I'm under lots of stress and under pressure and I'm going to crack. And when you read what these lads went through every day, you're thinking, oh my God, you know.
We don't know the meaning of the word stress today. You know, comparing with what these young people went through.
And despite all that, you still read in some of the comments he makes the humour the sense of humour that he had still comes through,
Yes.
even toward the end. You know, even admiring the firework display in the distance, and
Yeah.
you know, saying about the sandbags and
Yeah.
comparing it to Blackpool. But I suppose you need the humour to keep going. You know,
Yes.
it must be terribly difficult.
Yes. I know he lost a lot of his friends, a lot were killed that joined up with him in the Six Cheshires. And he used to talk, when I was older, he would tell me about that I think he lost 4 close friends of his, you know.
And again, they're probably people he knew from before the war.
Oh yes,
You know, friends.
they would have joined up with him.
Yeah.
Probably. Yeah.
I mean, when they talk about the Accrington Pals and these other towns where the Pals all joined up,
Yeah.
but that was actually quite typical at that time, wasn't it?
Yes.
They would all G each other up. We should all, you know,
Yeah.
serve king and country together. And so an entire generation, or classes, if you like, from school when they were younger,
Yeah.
were going together. And this is why it was so dangerous for the population, because many of them didn't come back.
Yeah. I think also for young men, it was this feeling of macho and experience, and it would be good, we'll have some fun, and I think,
Adventure.
in fact, that even applied in the Second World War. I think a lot of them joined up, you know, just for the adventure and something different to do, and because they were 18, I think, for the Second World War,
Yeah.
weren't they?
Yeah.
Age of, but it's all so sad when you think back. And I do feel that the First World War, the Second World War, which I did experience, and then I think there will be many more, because I think this is man. It's greed, and it's gone on through all the ages, right from the beginning of the Bible. I mean, even Cain killed his own brother, you know, right then. So there was greed and anger, and I think there always will be. Hence all the things that are going on at the moment in Syria and Iraq, and I just think it will never stop, because man will always be greedy and want more, and so it just goes on, and it's dreadful. Dreadful for people that have lost their young ones, especially now, the Afghanistan war and the Iraqi war, and it's just never ending, really.
The only small blessing is that at least it's not on that scale. I mean,
No.
one thing I was just thinking of then when you were saying that was, I went to, when I followed George's movements around France, not all of them, but sort of 75% of those locations I've been to, roughly. And there's one that's near Vimy Ridge, there's one about 3 or 4 miles away, where the French had a big battle with the Germans at the start of the war. And I stood in the middle of this cemetery, and the French have a very simple, whereas we have a nice stone that's very beautifully tended, they tend to have a wooden cross, which have to be sort of painted and varnished over time, otherwise they rot. So theirs look very simple. But I stood in this field with the French flags at both ends, and there were 10,000 men dead in this field, and I stood right in the middle of it. And as far as I could see, literally in every direction in this field, it was just crosses going out, and that's so humbling. And I just thought, this should never happen again like this. You know, I mean, you know, talk about other wars, but the way it was run, it was just, we've got plenty more men. Keep sending more men, we'll win in the end. And that's the disheartening thing, that the value of these people's lives wasn't given priority.
True, but I don't think that sort of war would ever happen again. I think the next war will probably be the last ever, because it'll be nuclear. Surely, it won't be men fighting in fields. You know, because evolution has taken us all on, and we're now into a different world. Even, you know, in my years, the world today is completely unbelievable to me, from what I remember 70 years ago, or even later than that. And we've gone beyond, I think, we've gone beyond guns and whiz-bangs and rum jars and things, and we're into all this high-tech stuff, and
Well, it's almost like the war's fought by robots now, drones and things, isn't
Yeah.
it? I wonder what George would have thought of all this, though, if he was
I don't know.
able to see us today discussing it, you know.
I don't know. But I feel he's with me, and I feel very proud of him.
I think he'd be very proud of you.
Do you?
Yes.
Well, thank you, Peter. I don't know about that.
I don't think he would.
I must just say, I did join the Land Army in the war, the Second World War.
Did you?
Yes. Yes, I was in the Land Army. No,
That's digging for victory.
that's
Yes.
anything to do with
Digging for
it.
victory, yeah.
Oh well, Margaret, we'll certainly have to talk to you about that. When we do the next project, we'll certainly have to talk to you about that. Could I just ask one more thing that I just wanted to make clear?
Yes.
Is that George, I wanted to make sure that we say somewhere that George, for those people that don't know about the different ways to join up and how eventually you didn't, would you be able to just have a little chat?
Yeah.
We can edit it in so you don't need to start anywhere.
Right, yeah.
But if you just say that George joined up 1914, it was then that he joined up, wasn't
Yes,
it?
it was. What was he
Yes.
doing beforehand?
What was he doing before? Do we know?
Out to him being age 20.
So he was, yeah, what was he first doing?
Okay.
Right, okay. One thing that we ought to add is, of course, that George, he wasn't conscripted, he wasn't drafted, he volunteered at the beginning of the war. Yeah?
Yes, he volunteered at the beginning of the war with all the other young men around Heatherley and Stockport. And
So he joined up with his friends.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, they joined together with his friends.
That's a bit
Yeah,
of a big adventure for them.
I don't know whether there was conscription then.
Later, when Kitchener came in, about 1915, so they were worried that there weren't enough men, and then he had the big drive, which was very successful, and then I think late 1915, early 1916,
Yeah.
then they had conscription where they decided that there was a certain percentage of the population weren't joining up who could do,
Yeah,
and then they were forced to join up.
and then you saw that poster of Kitchener needs you.
The country needs you.
Something, your country, was it your country?
Your country needs you,
Yeah. Yeah. But,
So-
he did join before that.
Well, he was promoted, in fact, before 1916, wasn't he?
He
So
was.
clearly joined up much early, you know.
Yeah.
So he became a corporal in
He was
1915.
corporal in 1915, yeah. And then sergeant in 1916.
Yeah. So he was actually doing very, very well. But the trouble is with the story is that the more you know, the more you want to know, isn't
Yes.
it? If only we know what he did in 1914 and 1915. Because
Yeah.
I bet that map would have a lot more sort of numbers and dots on it of all the other places he must have gone to.
Yeah. Yes, but he certainly did his bit, as did many, many thousands of others.
Of course. And most of them didn't come back.
And we won the war, but at what loss?
Mm.
Terrific loss.
And it's interesting, just if I can just mention about my friend in Germany, we tried to trace the German, to find out more about the German who we think saved George, and if it weren't for him, we wouldn't be sitting here today. None of our family would exist. But there were just two people with the same name in Germany that we could trace, and one of them did show great interest, but unfortunately because the Second World War obliterated a lot of things in terms of records, and he lost his parents already, so he hasn't got anybody to actually ask. But what was more interesting for me was his final comments. I know that you thought this was quite moving, just to show all the Germans weren't bad, you know, it's like any conflict. And he puts at the end of his letter to me, saying he can't find out anymore, but he says, although I was born in 1970, so he's actually younger than me, he says, I feel deeply ashamed of what has been done in Germany's name during World War I and World War II. Things have not been done right and never will be. So if the story you wrote was at least a glimmer of light during that period of time, I am very glad for knowing it, because it helps me as much as it did for your family. So clearly that shows that the average young German today are not happy with what happened either, and that they
I
feel
think it's
just
very
as you.
nice of him to have written that.
Yeah, it almost brings a tear to your eyes, doesn't
Yeah,
it, really?
yeah.
It's almost an apology, which he's not even responsible for, you know.
That's right.
Remarkable, really, that it just shows the feelings that it brings out in people.
It does. It does.
And there's a lot of sacrifice on all sides, and as you said earlier, the futility of war really the more you know about it, the more you think, why are we doing this?
Mm.
It's to be avoided.
Yes, but the weight will always go on, Pete.
It's human
Oh,
nature, perhaps.
Yeah.